Ever since Oblivion first released on the Xbox 360, I've been acutely aware of Bethesda games and all the different iterations of their singular game engine. Not to poke too much fun at Bethesda, considering their last two projects have been less than successful, some might say, but you can't argue the impact that they've had on the gaming industry at large. Every time these motherfuckers show up at a conference, everyone and their stepdad shows up to gawk at whatever these guys have to bring to the table. And that's not all blind fanaticism, because Bethesda and their associated companies have put out quite a lot of bangers recently. New Vegas, Prey, Deathloop, yes, Deathloop is good, shut your mouth, Doom, Wolfenstein, and even Skyrim, as much as it gets memed about now, basically shaped a generation of gamers single-handedly. Not since World of Warcraft have gamers' proverbial balls been castrated for such a long time that it's common to have at least 2 copies of Skyrim per household. Personally, our household has 8. And while I definitely contributed to the padding of Bethesda's pockets once or twice before, I haven't entirely understood the fascination that so many people have with their games. I mean, I played Skyrim before, beat the dumb fuck off dragon in Nordic Heaven, but I didn't want to dive right back into it after that point. I don't even think I played the DLCs for that game, despite the fact that I have them on almost every version of Skyrim that I own. And despite many attempts I've given to the post-apocalyptic side of this genre of gaming, I have yet to complete a single Fallout game. Yes, even New Vegas, which is supposedly the pinnacle of gaming and game writing. I couldn't put my finger on the problem even if I tried, honestly. Maybe it was the time I played them, their generally middling controls and systems, or the fact that I felt like the internet was breathing down my neck and I wasn't able to critique the game in any way, or else I'd be one of the dumb ones who just didn't get it. But all of that changed in 2023, because, as luck would have it, moments before the clock struck 12 and we leapt into this exciting new year, I beat my first Fallout game. And not only did I beat it, I beat the fuck out of it. Supernova difficulty, and I even managed to keep some of my companions alive by the end of it. Yep, my first Fallout game was The Outer Worlds, made by Obsidian Entertainment. And you know what's even worse than that? I actually kinda loved it. Now, I know a big group of people are probably going to be shitting themselves since I called The Outer Worlds a Fallout game, and you know what? They're right. It's not a Fallout game. I mean, the only similarities they have is that they both emphasize character interactions and encourage building a unique type of character that can specialize into certain aspects of the world, enhancing the role-playing aspect of the action RPG genre. I mean, it's not like the same people have worked on both of these games, right? Shitting aside, I had a really fun experience with this game that I missed on my first attempts with New Vegas and Fallout 3. Fallout 4 I'm not really going to include in this since it doesn't really have its role-playing side all put together, and the other two games are a much more fair comparison. The Outer Worlds showed me how enjoyable character creation and role-playing in a game can actually be. Well, actually that was Project Zomboid, but never mind that game for now. I didn't really take character creation that seriously in any of these games, and it always came back to bite me in the ass. I made the unfortunate mistake of thinking that Fallout would behave more like Skyrim and Oblivion, where you're able to try almost everything, it just might not work. When I made a busted character and got locked out of half the game in New Vegas, I just gave up. Back then, I didn't think it was worth playing a game that was actively fighting me every step of the way that I wasn't all that invested in yet. When I first tried playing The Outer Worlds back in 2019, I had that exact same problem. I didn't take the game seriously, I tried rushing through half of it, then promptly died and gave up on the game entirely. But this time, I sat down and gave the game a fair shake. And then I proceeded to binge the game over the course of a single week. Granted, it was over a holiday, I wasn't working on anything in particular, so I had ample time to devote to the game. I think over this past year, one of the main things I learned is that sometimes you have to meet things on their terms, whether that be music, movies, or in this case, games themselves. I took this game decently seriously, actually built a half-decent character, and went through the game fairly normally. I met Parvati, dealt with Edgewater, accidentally killed Felix as soon as I met him, then did the same thing with Nyoka, and then made it my life's mission to protect Parvati at all costs, because that bitch's quest took forever and I am not losing out on all that progress. Which brings me to my first criticism of the game. You see, I was under the impression that the companions throughout the game were a bigger part of it. For the first part of having each companion, it was actually pretty decent. They had a lot of dialogue options and they had a lot of comments about what was going on. Yet, halfway through the game, whenever I went to talk to these so-called companions, they barely had fuck all to say. I was really excited to see Parvati talk about how exciting it is to go through the Halcyon system and meet new people and places, and have her humble charms woo people across this really self-absorbed colony. I wondered if she was feeling homesick, and fantasized about if there would be a mission that I could take her back to Edgewater and have her interact with some of the people there, and nope. Every time I talk to her after a quest, it's just, damn, this shit is a piece of shit. I mean, I get that they can't react to literally every scenario on every single planet and moon and whatever, but even a tiny, hey boss, maybe we shouldn't commit mass murder right before a game-altering event would be nice, you know? I mean, the companions clearly have thoughts and opinions, as evidenced by the few times that they actually do react to something that happens. I mean, it says something that the writing for these characters is so compelling that I'd rather restart an entire dungeon than have them die permanently. But when I go to entirely different planets and moons and space stations and change the course of history and they say nothing, it really irks me. This game clearly wants you to have companions at all times, as evidenced by how much time and effort they put into their systems, which is great from a gameplay side, but for role-playing, it leaves me feeling a bit hollow. Parvati is the first companion-type person that I've ever gotten invested in a video game, and the fact that I don't get to show that beyond a single quest in the game is disheartening. You are given so many options and opportunities to tell Parvati off rather than just chat with her. I just hope that this is something they address in the sequel, because everything else surrounding this game is phenomenal. I really enjoyed the different groups that you get to interact with throughout the game and seeing their behaviors being reflected in their respective areas. The ostentatious nature of the richer parts of the colony versus the parts of the colony that are practically abandoned by those in power was a very interesting contrast to explore, and I like that the people that you interact with in this world weren't stereotypical or generic. Spoiler for the Edgewater part of this game, when you meet Adelaide, she makes it very clear that she cares about her people, but she does not give a fuck about anyone in Edgewater proper. She would rather everyone in the town suffer than reunite with them at all. And even after convincing everyone else to return to Edgewater in that questline and agree to fight for reparations for them, Adelaide will sit around and criticize you for siding with the tyrants who don't care about their people. Yet she'd rather doom her own people, both current and former, rather than put her pride aside. Yes, she has her personal reasons for not agreeing with the leader of Edgewater, but having that be the sole reason that you're willing to put so many others' lives in danger is ludicrous to me. And I like that her story is consistent from beginning to end. After I got my ending for Edgewater, I looked online to see what the alternate options were, and each one of them where you side with her, she is an asshole to Edgewater proper and leaves many of those citizens to die. And that is only one part of one of the many stories in this game. Admittedly, not all of them are bangers, but I enjoyed learning and interacting with the variety of scenarios this game sets you up with. The only thing I wish I could change, and this is my bigger criticism of the game, is I wish that there were more neutral options. Very often in games, the neutral option is either not participating in a mission or having both sides in a state of limbo. On Monarch, there's a conflict between the two main groups, and due to the main questline requiring you to interact with these groups and complete a series of side quests for them, you'll likely get to a point where both sides see you as an ally of sorts. Then, unrelatedly, a spaceship with a huge turret falls out of the sky next to the two factions, and they both ask you to get it for each of them. And at this point, considering that I knew that this storyline was going to end in a bloodbath and I didn't want either group to die, I made the personal decision not to give either of these morons a device to wipe each other off the map with. Yet, for the game, there was no way for me to express that, so this quest just remained incomplete in my quest log. Retroactively, I know that there is a third option to complete this questline, but there's no hints to that being an option at this point in the game, which really frustrated me because I felt like I was doing the best thing for these people. Again, I get that the game couldn't have possibly accounted for every single choice a player would want to make, but I feel like a neutral option for these larger quests is kind of a no-brainer at this point. Hell, even a selfish option like using the turret on my own ship would have made me so much happier than what is currently in the game. I mean, I'm the one who's traveling through Halcyon getting into all these dangerous scenarios, why am I not allowed to have the bigger gun here? Isn't the motto for democracy to have the biggest stick in the room and to thwack those beneath you with it? I mean, that's definitely the impression I got throughout playing this game. Playing on Supernova was definitely the best decision for me getting through this game the first time, but boy howdy was it frustrating at times. I actually didn't have a hard time with the gameplay difficulties that it implements. Enemies hit harder, you have to manage food and water and sleep, that was all pretty chill. I even liked only being able to fast travel to my ship, for the most part. There were points on Monarch where the fast travel was really starting to piss me off. Unless I'm mistaken, I think Monarch is the biggest open area in the game, and therefore you have a bunch of enemies and objectives spread across this wide area. Thankfully, there's multiple landing sites in the open area where you can park your ship. But in reality, what that means for an underleveled player is that every time I have to go halfway across the planet quickly, I need to fast travel to my current ship's location, go into orbit, land at the closer landing pad, then get out and then go back to running to my destination. It also doesn't help that Monarch probably has the most quests you have to complete at once, and they all go in opposite directions, it feels like. Once I completed my quests on Monarch, I never wanted to go back to that backwater planet, and thankfully I didn't have to. All that said, the worst part about Supernova is easily the companion's permadeath, and not for the reason you might be thinking. I actually like having to care about companions and their well-being, but the difficulty curve for this system is all fucked up here. Not only are the beginning areas a lot more difficult since you have limited resources and enemies are more difficult as a result, but the bottom of each companion's perk tree features an auto-revive that operates on a cooldown. Not only that, but at the bottom of your perk tree is one that revives all members of your party when you heal yourself on the same cooldown. A cooldown that refreshes if you fast travel to, I don't know, maybe your ship after completing a dungeon or finishing a quest. It gets even worse than that because at some point in the last quarter of my Supernova playthrough, I found a healing raid that essentially meant that I was rolling into my final boss fight with a DPS and an aggro tank as a healer who could just sit back and let the other two do all the work. Obviously I didn't do that because I don't consider MMOs a compelling form of gameplay, but that didn't change the fact that we were essentially invincible in the final level of the most challenging game mode this game could muster. And as if being the cherry on top to that system, both of my party members used their self-revives as well as my perk revive and were dead by the end of the fight. In a moment of desperation, since I was fully prepared to restart the entire final level, I tried using the healing ray on my dead companions, and after a full charge they both sprung back to life. So, to reiterate, at the very end of the entire game, I was essentially playing this at the highest difficulty where the only real downside was that I could only teleport back to my ship, which was a non-issue for me. I don't hate that this is an option in the game, I just don't like that the progression path wasn't flipped. After I got off of Monarch, the game continued to get easier and easier. I pissed off an entire planet and was essentially an enemy of the state, and it didn't really matter all that much. I think a better alternative would be to have revives at some sort of vendor that you would have to use some of your resources in order to revive your teammates. Maybe you'd be able to craft them at the workshop and they incrementally become more expensive. That way the early game can be easier while also making the late game more difficult if you're being reckless. That's honestly my only criticism of the gameplay side of Outer Worlds. I loved basically everything else. I'd like the workshop to be explained a little better, since it took me until the midpoint of the game until I realized I could level up my weapons, but that could just be on me. I think the flaw system is wonderfully implemented, if a little too generic. I think one of the first perks I picked up was relating to food, which was fine because I already had to worry about food and health and sleep on Supernova, but the rest I saw was just fear of this thing. The funniest one from my playthrough is when I picked up Robophobia, or whatever it was called, and was confused as to why my numbers were going down every time I had cleared a room and was just trying to lockpick something. Then, after several hours of gameplay, it finally dawned on me that I was walking around the system with a mechanic and a giant fucking robot that my character was deathly afraid of. If that isn't an accurate representation on how I operate on a day-to-day basis, I don't know what is. The gameplay is incredibly fun. It has the best implementation of the VAT system I've personally ever played with, and the combat was almost too satisfying. I played a lot of Borderlands and Destiny back in the day, so seeing those numbers flash in the hundreds and thousands was incredibly stimulating. I didn't mess around with melee combat all that much, because range combat was so visceral, but after getting a taste of the different weapons you can wield, I wouldn't be at all opposed to a melee-only playthrough. And I guess that's the most surprising thing about this game. I want to dive back into it. I want to experience this galaxy and uncover more of its facets and be an active part of the story for what I already know the beats of. I can't say that for Skyrim. Hell, I can't even say that for games whose story I like significantly more. For the first time ever, I can understand why people go crazy for New Vegas. I understand the appeal of playing these RPGs and actually playing by their rules. I've always been a fan of D&D and other tabletops like it, but it's something that I thought was purely confined to that method of play. I never actually thought a video game could be capable of being so compelling with those systems. And with Outer Worlds 2 and so many games coming out nowadays that put the role-playing back into the role-playing game genre, I'm so glad that I finally get to be a part of that train.